Hey guys, Chris Wagner with Ironman 4x4 America. We've got a brand new 2019 Tacoma. We're here in my garage. We're gonna show you how to install our Foam Cell Pro suspension kit. It's super easy to do. You just need a couple hand tools. You're good to go. Before we get started, I laid out some of the basic tools you'll need to do your suspension install. None of the tools here are fancy or special. You can get them down at your local hardware store. What I would do is, if you're missing anything, go find that neighbor that you hate that's always causing noise, because he's definitely going to have tools in his garage. Got the truck up on jack stands, pulled the wheel off, grab a 10 mil wrench, take this ABS bolt off. I've got a body removal clip tool here because that's what it's for. We got to move these body clips out of the way because we need to access for our upper control arm bolt. So pull the rear one out, pop the front one out too. Next thing we're gonna do is get this sway bar out of the way. It's a 17 mil flange nut, but one little trick is, if you've got an older Toyota that's full of grime and dirt, take a 6 mil Allen wrench, stick it in there, then you won't spin your ball joint when you loosen it off. Bingo. Spin the nut around, spin it on, hammer, we're out. Boom, sway bar's disconnected. All right, grab yourself a pair of needle nose pliers. We're gonna get this castle nut off of the upper ball joint. Toyota supplies this totally awesome spring clip. That's kind of cool. And this is 19 millimeter castle nut. So sometimes these are on tight. They shouldn't be too tight, especially on a new vehicle. But one trick you can do is, if you can't get enough torque on your wrench, you can tie 2 wrenches together and break the thing loose. Hold on tight, give it a little bit of pressure. Super easy. Toyota provides on this upper spindle here a strike surface. That's what you want to hit with a hammer. When you shock that, it'll shock it loose. Usually you can do 1 or 2 hits, especially on a new truck like this. Boom. All right, wiggle this UCA up and out, spindle back. I like to grab a bungee cord, find something you can tie onto that's out of the way. It's fairly stable. Hold right there. Do not hook on your brake line. Brake lines are not to be hooked on. Oh, you know what that sound is. That's the sound we're getting in right there, like that. So we got our spindle separated from our upper control arm ball joint. We've got a bungee cord here that's tied up to something secure. The reason why you want to do this, I mean, sometimes you don't have to, but one, you've got a loose brake line here and your ABS wire. You just don't want to put any kind of stress. Wires don't like being ripped in half. So now that we've got that all done, we can go up here to our upper shock perch. And there's 3 bolts up here that you have to loosen and take off to get the strut out. The way I like to do it is, I like to go at the back one first. It's the hardest one to get to. It's a 14 mil wrench. If you can break the thing loose, then you can spin it with your fingers and it's not under any pressure. Then I work on the fronts. I leave the last one here on the front on because that's what's holding the strut in place while we go after the bottom shock mount bolt. All right, let's do the lower shock bolt. If your truck's gummed up and full of junk, I'd put the box in wrench on the back, on the head of the bolt, and then use a deep dish 19 socket to get the front of the nut off. Grab yourself a smacker. Lift up under here. You can take it out by hand. Done. Okay, now that we got the lower shock bolt out, your control arm will just push back down. Take your left hand, grab the bottom of the strut, lift up. Remember that nut we left on up here? Now, if you push up from the bottom, you can spin that off because it's just on there fingered loose. Move your upper control arm out of the way. move your sway bar link. Now I unhooked it from the other side, so make sure you get on the passenger side, get that unbolted. This whole thing just slides down and out. Done. I've been forced to lift these up. This Bilstein one is very small, and our Foam Cell Pro is Macedonic. But you can just see the overall difference in quality. The Foam Cell Pro is very beefy. Let's just take a quick look here. You can see the obvious differences in size. The Bilstein is real skinny and small, which I guess is okay. But our Foam Cell Pros are huge in comparison. You can see 360-degree welds on the bottom mount. Shock body, outer diameter is 2.8 inches. It's got a 1/8 inch wall thickness on it. All twin tube design. There's tons of oil in this thing. All right, let's get this thing in there. What I do is I take a strut top nut. I secure it gently into my teeth. Lift over your strut. Go down. Find yourself the right position. There you go. Spin that on there. Perfect. One reason I only put one strut top nut on and leave the other two off is because you have some adjustability here. You can move it around when you're trying to get your bottom shock bolt in. So take your bottom shock bolt, lift up on the lower control arm with your left hand. That's about right. And it takes a little bit of effort. Spin the nut on, leave it finger tight. We're going to tighten this all up when we get it on the ground. That way our bushing doesn't twist. If you tighten it in the air and then set it down, the bushing can twist, it'll squeak, possibly fail prematurely. All right, now that we've got the bottom shock bolt in, we can tighten down these top strut nuts. One trick is if you just grab with your left hand underneath the lower control arm and lift up a little bit, see how the shock will raise up? Then you can just finger tight. Boom. Grab your 14 mil. I always like to tighten up the back one first. It's the hardest to get to. Takes the most amount of time, but get it out of the way. Then the front ones are easy to do. These top strut nuts, they need to be tight. It's 47 foot-pounds is what they call for, but a lot of folks don't have a torque wrench, and even if you do, it's such a confined space, you're probably not even going to be able to get it in here. So take a 14 millimeter wrench, invite his friend, lock them up, and give it a pull. And you can always tell 47 foot-pounds. It's like this. You go, okay, that's it right there. Next, we're going to remove our stock upper control arm. We're replacing it with one of our new Ironman Pro Forged upper control arm UCAs. It's stronger, lighter, and allows for the proper caster correction. To do that, there's a long through bolt. Goes all the way through and comes out the other side. Take a 19 millimeter wrench, get it on that end of the bolt, 19 on the nut side, start to pull down, get that nut off of there, and remove the washer. So trying to get this through bolt out for our upper control arm seems kind of crazy, but Toyota did not leave us any room. It hits in this inner fender pinch weld, but your only two options are either to cut it out or get a pry bar and slightly bend it out of the way. I don't really like cutting if I don't have to, so we used a large pry bar, massaged it over to the side, and we're able to get the bolt out. You can use a standard pry bar, but there's really no place to get leverage on to pry it out of the way. So I'm a big fan of bigger is better. I got a piece of black pipe and a wood block. Set the block up in here, give yourself some leverage, and then you can get in there and really pry that out of the way. There we go. You also notice to get this through bolt out, there's a wiring harness behind here. So let's pop this clip out, get it out of the way. Grab your needle nose, pinch, push through. So once you have your inner fender pushed out of the way and all your wiring harnesses pushed back, go ahead and slowly guide this through bolt out and through the front. Trying to wiggle this into the stock mount. It's a tight fit, but I found that if you just kind of set the front and then wiggle the back around a little bit, you'll get it in there. We'll grab our through bolt. Make sure you've got the washer lined up. Set this through bolt. Cool. Right on. All right, grab your rear washer and nut. Get it all set up. Grab your 19 mil wrenches, one for the front, one for the back, and just get it snug for now. Perfect. So now that we've got our upper control arm all installed, we need to get the ball joint shaft back in our spindle. And the one thing you'll notice is because it's a new ball joint, it's really, really tight and tough. If it moves, there's something wrong with it. You want it to be tight like that. So what I do is I throw this castle nut, which comes with several castellation slots, and tighten that bad boy up, and then grab a wrench, and then you can actually try to adjust the angle of your ball joint. Now when you set it up, it should feel a little bit better. You may have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Boom. Okay, as you're tightening up your castle nut, you can see that your spindle's drawing up onto the tapered ball joint shaft. Pull it down nice and tight. You actually don't have to have your castle nut too tight on this. Give it about, yeah, that's 50 pounds. Perfect. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to line up our cotter pin hole with one of the castellation slots. It's very technical. There you go. Cotter pin through. You know, different people have different theories on cotter pins. I don't like them like that. I like them up and down. Take your finger. Bend it back. Let's get our sway bar link connected back up to our spindle. Oh, that goes in nice and easy. Let's not forget that it's a ball joint, so it takes an Allen key. That way, when you're tightening it up, we don't spin the ball joint in the housing. What is that, 17? All we got to do now is get our ABS bracket reattached. Make sure you check your instructions on this because there are some different options that can be model specific. Tighten it back in and grab a 10 mil wrench. All right, that's all tightened down and ready to go. Last steps, we just got to get our clips back in place for our wire harnesses. Those pop right back in. Super easy. Get our splash guards back up. Make sure everything's secure. Last thing we need to do though is once we get the truck on the ground, we'll tighten up our lower shock bolt. Obviously it's a trick just about everybody knows, but if you're working with your wheels off, just tuck them underneath your truck. If something failed and it came crashing down, at least it'd land on the tire and the wheel. Wouldn't totally crush you to death, I guess. You'd have time to bleed out slowly. With big wheels and tires, getting them back on your truck sometimes is a huge pain. So what I like to do, you're gonna get your pants a little dirty, but sit down with your legs on each side, and then you can use your knees with your arms. Lift it up, find the top lug. Makes it a lot easier than lifting over and breaking your back. A lot of guys like using impact guns to get their lugs on. Just be careful, don't go crazy. Get them snug, we're gonna come back, torque them to spec. 61 foot-pounds. Got the truck on the ground. It's time to tighten up the upper control arm through bolt. 19 millimeter wrench, 75 foot-pounds. Yep. Now we're ready to do our final torque on our lugs. 76 foot-pounds. Star pattern. Bro, don't you know? E-brakes don't lock your front wheels. Put a chalk in it. Got the truck pulled around. Used a floor jack. Jacked up the rear differential. We have jack stands underneath our frame rails. Now we can use the floor jack to articulate our rear axle up and down so that we can pull the U-bolts off and pull our leaf packs out. 19 millimeter socket. There's one. Hold on to your bracket on the last one so it doesn't come slamming down. All right, bracket out. Front and rear U-bolt out. Hey, another thing, don't be lazy. Take care of your nuts. Also got to get your e-brake cable disconnected from this leaf spring mount. 12 millimeter. Let's get the top of the shock off. You can use a set of vice grips on these flats. Lock them down. 14 mil wrench. Break it loose. The vice grips will hold the top of the shock mount in place while you loosen the nut. All right, let's get the lower shock bolt out. 17 millimeter. What was on there loose? Now that we got the top of the shock loosened up, let's go ahead and lower our jack down. We'll lower the rear axle. It'll give us some room to get the shock out. All right, pop a shock bolt out. She's out. And I'm gonna pull the bottom leaf spring shackle bolt out, and then the leaf springs will lift off the top. Hey, here's the thought. Let your truck cool down before you jam your hands up against a burning hot friggin' muffler and fry your hand. Okay, now we're to the front side of the leaf spring. It's a 19 millimeter, just like the rear, but you gotta loosen the nut from the inside of the frame, which is a bear. So you might wanna grab 2 wrenches, get some leverage. Pretty tight clearances in here, so you're not gonna be able to use a socket and an impact. Once you get the front out, it'll just rest back down on its perch on the rear axle. Then just be careful you don't get it tangled up in your e-brake when you're pulling it out. Oh, it's just a little guy. Now we got to get our Ironman 4x4 polyurethane bushings installed into our leaf springs. What's great about Ironman 4x4's leaf spring bushings are they're made out of a high-density injection molded polyurethane material. It gives you real precise locating in the spring, and it's a really durable bearing surface in your leaf springs. The other great thing is they're made to take hot temperatures but give you a nice, soft, comfortable vehicle ride. They also come with these grooves on the outside and a rifled bore to give you better grease distribution. Greasing these bad boys up is super easy. Separate them out from the sleeve, grab some red grease, lather up the outside. Yeah, that's good. I like to use my pinky when I grease bushings. That way later when I'm picking my nose, I don't jam a bunch of grease up my friggin' nose hole. Get this fresh one back in here. Careful working it around. Cradle there. First try. Let's wait to tighten that down until we get the truck back on the ground. There we go. Just wiggle it around till you jam it on in. Don't lay your face on hot drum brakes either. We'll lift up the rear axle. Hey, I didn't see you there. Let me give you another little tip. See that alignment pin? It's got to line up. That's why it's called an alignment pin. So what you can do is shake this around like you're a maniac. That's how you do it. All right, let's get these U-bolts on. And your bump stop here has these little raised lips to keep everything lined up. Grab your split washer and a nut. Another thing you should think about when you're tightening up these U-bolts is you want to make sure that the front and the back are about equidistant from each other. So a couple ways of doing that, but I just count threads. That's about right. Once you get them all tightened down and evenly spaced, count your threads, lock them down to 52 foot-pounds. Now let's get our e-brake cable back on. I just think it's funny how small these Bilsteins are. I guess it just kind of is what it is. It's a nitro gas shock, so one thing that makes it tough is when you go to reinstall them, you've got to push them down and put a bunch of preload on them. And then once you have them down, you only have so much time before they bounce back. Cool thing about the Foam Cell Pros is they're not under nitrogen pressure, so you can collapse them down, makes it easy for install. When you get your Foam Cell Pro shock, it's going to come with a bag of hardware. You're going to have 2 similar flat washers. You're going to have a top hat washer with a locating flange. You're going to have a rubber bushing that has a locating flange on the top, and then a flat rubber bushing that's nice and smooth, flat on both sides, and then your nylock top nut. The way you build this is the first flat washer goes on the top of your shock, followed by the flat bushing that's smooth on both sides. Then you take the washer that has the locating flange. That fits everything on top. Slide it into your shock perch. The next piece is the rubber bushing that has the locating flange. That locating flange goes down. That's what sandwiches in between your frame and your shock perch. Then you put that last flat washer cup down, and then the nylock nut on the top. Let's get this lower shock bolt in, and we'll tighten it down when the truck's back down on the ground. All right, let's lock the top of the shock down. 19 mil wrench. If the thread stud starts to twist on you, you can always take a pair of vice grips and clamp down on the flats. Wheel me, bro. Just like the front, we want to lower the truck, and now we can tighten up the rear bottom shock bolt, 43 foot-pounds. I'm going to lock down that rear shackle bolt to 89 foot-pounds. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to tighten up the front leaf spring mount. This one's a little tougher. You have a clearance issue. The nut is up against the muffler. Just throw a wrench on the nut side. We'll get a torque wrench on the bolt, and it'll get us close. 89 foot-pounds. Whee! Now I'm going to install a driveline spacer kit. It's a pretty simple concept. We've got these spacers. What we're going to do is these 2 bolts, unbolt our carrier hanger bearing bracket, drop it down, pop the spacers in, bolt them back up. It moves our driveline angle to a more optimal position. All right, grab your new spacer plate and your new hardware. Goes bolt, split washer, flat washer. Straight through. There's a rib nut up there. It plugs right back in. Another trick is on the other side, leave this bolt loose, then you don't have to drop the whole thing out. You can do it one side at a time. Tighten these bad boys down, nice and smooth. Okay, all done. Now we just have to take it out for a quick road test, get it in for a front end alignment, and after you have about 500 miles on your truck, crawl underneath there, make sure everything's tight and still torqued down. Congrats, you got your new Ironman 4x4 Foam Cell Pro suspension all installed and ready to go. Now get out there and tear it up.